The iron chain scraped against Georgia Warren's raw wrists as the wagon lurched through the dusty streets of White Pine, Nevada, and she wondered if this new master would kill her faster than the old one had been trying to. It was August 1876, and the desert sun beat down mercilessly on the small mining town nestled in the shadow of the Ruby Mountains. Georgia sat among 3 other women in the back of Marcus Gunderson's wagon, all of them wearing the same hollow expression that came from months of abuse and starvation. Her dress, if the torn gray fabric could still be called that, hung loosely on her frame. She had been 19 when Gunderson bought her papers from a crooked labor contractor in San Francisco 8 months ago, promising work as a housekeeper. The reality had been beatings, near starvation, and labor that would break most men. Now she was 20, though she felt ancient in her bones. Gunderson had gathered them in the wagon that morning, not explaining where they were taking them, and Georgia had learned long ago not to ask questions. Questions earned you the back of his hand, or worse, time in the root cellar with no food or water. The wagon stopped in front of a saloon, and Gunderson jumped down, his boots hitting the dirt with a heavy thud. He was a big man who had once been handsome, but cruelty had twisted his features into something grotesque. His eyes were small and mean, set too close together in a face that always seemed to be sneering. "Get down," he barked, and the women scrambled to obey. Georgia's legs nearly gave out when her feet hit the ground. They had not been fed that morning, and it had been 2 days since their last real meal. Inside the saloon, several men were gathered around tables, drinking despite the early hour. The establishment was called the Silver Dollar, and it was one of the nicer places in White Pine, with actual glass windows and a polished bar. Georgia kept her eyes down, knowing that looking at free men could earn her punishment. "Gentlemen," Gunderson announced, his voice booming. "I've got 4 prime workers here, strong backs, willing hands. I'm looking to part with their contracts for the right price." Georgia's stomach twisted. She had known this was coming. Gunderson had been complaining lately about the cost of feeding them, about how they were not worth the trouble. She had hoped in some small, desperate corner of her heart that he might simply release them. But men like Gunderson did not give up property without getting something in return. A man stood from a table in the corner, and Georgia risked a glance upward. He was tall, well over 6 feet, with broad shoulders and the build of someone who spent his days doing hard physical work. His hair was dark, almost black, and hung just past his collar. He wore dusty range clothes, a blue shirt and brown pants tucked into scuffed boots. A hat hung down his back by a leather cord, but it was his face that caught her attention. He had strong features, a straight nose and a firm jaw, but there was something gentle in his eyes, something that seemed completely out of place in this rough town. "Xavier Ellis," he said, his voice deep and measured. "I run a cattle ranch about 15 miles north of here. What are you asking?" Gunderson named figures that made Georgia's head spin. She was worth $300, apparently. $300 for a life of misery. Xavier walked around the women, examining them as one might examine horses at auction. Georgia hated it, hated being looked at like property, but she held still. When he reached her, he stopped. "Look at me," he said quietly. She lifted her eyes slowly, prepared for whatever she might see. Lust, cruelty, indifference. But what she saw in Xavier Ellis's face was anger. Not at her, but burning behind his eyes was a fury that seemed directed at Gunderson, at the situation, at the whole unjust system that allowed this to happen. "How did you get these contracts?" Xavier asked, his voice still level but with an edge to it now. "Legal and proper," Gunderson said, puffing out his chest. "Labor contracts, all signed in San Francisco. These women owed debts, and I bought the rights to their labor until those debts are paid. And how much of their debt remains?" Gunderson waved a hand dismissively. "That's between me and them. You want to buy their contracts, you buy them clean. What they owe me is my business." Xavier's jaw tightened. Georgia watched him, saw the muscle jumping in his cheek as he clenched his teeth. For a moment she thought he might walk away, and her heart sank. But then he reached into his pocket and pulled out a leather wallet. "I will take her," he said, nodding toward Georgia. 300, you said, for that one. She's the strongest of the lot. I want 400. You said 300 not 2 minutes ago. I changed my mind." Xavier stared at Gunderson for a long moment, and Georgia saw his hand drift toward his hip, where a revolver hung in a worn holster. Then he seemed to make a decision, and his hand moved back to his wallet. 350, and that's my final offer. Take it or I walk, and I'll make sure every rancher in 3 counties knows about your business practices." Gunderson's face went red, but he nodded curtly. "Fine. 350. Money changed hands and papers were signed." Georgia watched in a daze, unable to quite believe what was happening. One of the other women, Mary, squeezed her hand briefly, and Georgia squeezed back. Then Xavier was taking her arm, his grip firm but not painful, and leading her out of the saloon. The sunlight outside seemed too bright after the dimness of the saloon. Xavier guided her to a horse tied at the hitching post, a big bay gelding that looked well cared for. "Can you ride?" he asked. Georgia nodded. She had grown up on a small farm in Missouri before her parents died and left her with debts she could not pay. She knew horses. "Good, we have a long ride ahead." He untied the horse and swung up into the saddle, then reached down for her. "Give me your hand." She hesitated. This was the moment when it would start, she thought. He had bought her, and now he would expect her to be grateful, to do whatever he wanted. She had heard stories from other women in similar situations, but his hand remained extended, patient, and finally she took it. He pulled her up behind him with surprising ease, and she had to wrap her arms around his waist to keep from falling. She could feel the solid warmth of him through his shirt, could smell leather and horses, and something clean like soap. They rode out of White Pine heading north, and Georgia tried not to think about what awaited her. The landscape here was different from Missouri, all sagebrush and rocky soil, with mountains rising in the distance. It was beautiful in a harsh way, and despite her fear, she found herself noticing the way the light played across the hills. Xavier did not speak as they rode, and Georgia was grateful for the silence. She was too tired and too frightened to make conversation. Her mind kept replaying the moment in the saloon when he had looked at her, the anger she had seen in his eyes. Anger at what? At Gunderson? At her situation? She did not know, and she was afraid to hope it meant anything good. They rode for nearly 2 hours before Xavier finally spoke. "There's a canteen on my left side. You should drink." Georgia fumbled for the canteen with shaking hands and managed to get it open. The water was warm but clean, and she had to force herself not to gulp it down. When she had drunk her fill, she stoppered it and hung it back on the saddle horn. "Thank you," she whispered. "When did you last eat?" 2 days ago, bread and some beans." She felt him stiffen in the saddle. 2 days. "Yes, sir, my name is Xavier. You do not need to call me sir." "Yes, S." She caught herself. "Xavier." They rode on in silence for another hour before the ranch came into view. It was larger than Georgia had expected, with a good-sized house built of timber and stone, a big barn, several outbuildings and corrals holding cattle and horses. Everything looked well-maintained, prosperous. Xavier guided the horse to the house and dismounted, then helped her down. Her legs were shaking from the long ride and from hunger, and she stumbled as her feet hit the ground. Xavier caught her, his hands steady on her arms. "Easy," he said. Let's get you inside and get some food in you." The house was nice inside, with wooden floors and simple but sturdy furniture. It was clean and organized, which surprised Georgia. She had expected a bachelor's chaos. Xavier led her to the kitchen and pulled out a chair at the table. "Sit," he said, not unkindly. She sat, watching as he moved around the kitchen with surprising competence. He built up the fire in the stove, pulled out a loaf of bread and some butter, sliced thick pieces of ham, and poured milk into a glass. Within minutes, he had placed a plate in front of her laden with more food than she had seen in months. "Eat slowly," he cautioned. "Your stomach will not thank you if you rush it." Georgia stared at the plate, then at him. "Is this for me?" Something flickered across his face, pain or anger or both. "Yes, Georgia, it's for you." She wanted to ask how he knew her name, then remembered that it had been on the papers Gunderson had given him. She picked up a slice of bread with trembling hands and took a small bite. It was fresh and soft, and she nearly cried at the taste of it. Xavier sat down across from her and watched her eat. Not in a creepy way, she realized, but as though he needed to make sure she actually consumed the food. When she had eaten half the plate, he refilled her milk glass without being asked. "I need to explain some things to you," he said finally. "I know you are frightened. I know you have no reason to trust me, but I want you to understand why I bought your contract." Georgia set down her bread and forced herself to meet his eyes. "I came to White Pine today to pick up supplies and to see if any of the miners wanted work for the fall cattle drive. Instead, I found Gunderson auctioning you and those other women like livestock." His hands clenched on the table. "I could not buy all of you. I did not have enough cash on hand, and I suspect if I had tried to leave and come back with more money, he would have scattered you to the winds. So I bought you with the intention of setting you free." Georgia stared at him. "Free, free," he repeated. "I will give you your contract papers. You can go wherever you want, do whatever you want. I will not stop you." She could not process what he was saying. Free. The word seemed foreign, impossible. "I do not understand." "What's not to understand? You're a human being, not property. What Gunderson did, what the labor contractors do, it is all legal according to the letter of the law, but it is wrong. So I am giving you a choice. A choice." "Yes." He leaned forward, and she saw earnestness in his face. "You can leave right now if you want. I will give you money for a stagecoach, a letter of reference, whatever you need. Or you can stay here if you want. I could use help around the ranch. I would pay you real wages, $30 a month plus room and board. You would have your own room, your own space. And I promise you, on my life and my honor, that I would never hurt you or force you to do anything against your will." Georgia felt tears burning behind her eyes. It was too much, too overwhelming. She had spent 8 months in hell, and now this stranger was offering her heaven on a plate. It had to be a trick. Men did not do things like this, not in her experience. "Why?" she whispered. Xavier was quiet for a long moment. "My mother was an immigrant from Ireland. She came to this country with nothing, seeking a better life. She ended up in a situation not unlike yours, trapped by debt and unscrupulous men. My father, he bought her contract with the intention of freeing her. They fell in love and got married, and they were happy for 20 years before fever took them both. I was 17. I remember what my mother told me about those days, about how frightened she was, about how my father's kindness saved her life. So when I see something like what I saw today, I act. Because someone acted for my mother, and because it is the right thing to do." Georgia looked down at her plate, at the food she had barely been able to believe was real. Tears spilled down her cheeks, and she could not stop them. "I am sorry," she said, wiping at her face with the back of her hand. "I am sorry, You do not need to apologize." Xavier stood and retrieved a handkerchief from a drawer, handing it to her. You have been through hell. Take your time. Eat your food. We can talk more later." He left the kitchen, and Georgia heard his boots on the wooden floor as he walked through the house. She sat there, clutching his handkerchief, and let herself cry for the first time in months. Not from pain or fear, but from relief and confusion and the faint, terrifying stirring of hope. When she had finished eating, she stood on shaky legs and looked around the kitchen. It was a mess from Xavier's cooking, and her instincts, honed by months of Gunderson's demands, kicked in. She began washing dishes, her hands moving automatically through the familiar motions. She was drying the last plate when Xavier returned. He stopped in the doorway, looking at the clean kitchen. "You did not have to do that," he said. "I wanted to. You made me food. It seemed right." He nodded slowly. "Come with me. I will show you where you can sleep." He led her upstairs to a small bedroom with a real bed, a dresser, and a window that looked out over the ranch yard. It was clean and cozy, with a quilt on the bed that looked handmade. "This was my mother's sewing room," Xavier explained. "I have not used it for much since she passed. But there's a good bed, and you will have privacy. The door locks from the inside." He pointed to the lock. "I have the only other key, and I will give it to you right now so you know I cannot come in without your permission." He pulled a small key from his pocket and placed it in her hand. His fingers were warm and calloused, and the brief touch sent an odd feeling through George's chest. "There's a bathing room down the hall," he continued. "I will heat water for you if you would like a bath. I imagine it has been a while." "A bath," Georgia repeated, the words feeling strange in her mouth. At Gunderson's they had been allowed to wash once a week in cold water from a trough. "Yes. Yes, I would like that very much. Give me 20 minutes to heat the water." He left, and Georgia sat down on the bed. It was soft, so much softer than the thin mattress on the floor she had been sleeping on for months. She ran her hand over the quilt, marveling at the intricate stitching. Xavier's mother had made this, a woman who had been through what Georgia was going through, a woman who had been saved. Could it really be that simple? Could Xavier really just want to help her? She stood and went to the window, looking out at the land. The sun was starting to descend toward the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink. She could see cattle grazing in distant fields, could hear the sound of horses moving in the corral. It was peaceful here, so different from the chaos and cruelty of Gunderson's place. A knock on the door made her turn. "The water is ready," Xavier called through the wood. The bathing room was small but functional, with a large metal tub already filled with steaming water. Xavier had left soap and a towel, both clean and fresh. He was gone when she peeked out into the hallway, and she locked both doors before stripping off her filthy dress. The water was hot, almost too hot, and it stung her bruised skin at first. But as she sank into it, Georgia felt something inside her begin to unclench. She scrubbed herself until her skin was pink, washing away months of dirt and blood and fear. Her hair took longer, matted as it was, but she worked through it patiently with the soap. When she finally emerged from the tub, she felt more human than she had in ages. But she had a problem. Her dress was unwearable, torn and filthy and reeking. She wrapped herself in the towel and cracked open the door. "Xavier," she called softly. She heard footsteps and then his voice from the other side of the door, carefully not looking in. "What do you need?" "I do not have anything clean to wear." "Right, I should have thought of that. Hold on." He returned a few minutes later and passed a bundle through the barely open door. It was one of his shirts and a pair of pants with a rope belt. They would be far too large, but they were clean. "Thank you," she said. "I will ride into town tomorrow and get you some proper clothes. For tonight, those will have to do." The shirt hung to her knees, and she had to roll the pants' legs up several times and cinch the belt tight to keep them from falling down. but they were soft and clean and smelled like Xavier, like leather and soap and something masculine that was not unpleasant. When she emerged from the bathing room, she found him in the kitchen again, cooking something that smelled amazing. He looked up when she entered, and something in his expression made her pause. He was looking at her with an intensity that should have frightened her, but somehow did not. "You look better," he said finally. "How do you feel?" "Cleaner. Warmer." She hesitated. Confused, he smiled, and it transformed his face. It was the first real smile she had seen from him, and it reached his eyes, crinkling the corners. It was a kind smile, genuine and warm, and something in George's chest did a strange little flip. "That's understandable," he said. "Come, sit. I made stew. You need to get your strength back." They ate together at the kitchen table, and Xavier told her about the ranch. He ran about 500 head of cattle with the help of 2 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse. They were out checking the herd and would not be back until tomorrow. He had inherited the ranch from his parents and had been running it for the past 3 years. "It is hard work," he admitted, "but honest work. I like it. I like working with the animals, like being out under the sky. It is not a fancy life, but it is a good one." "It sounds wonderful," Georgia said honestly. After dinner, Xavier showed her how to work the lamps and where to find extra blankets if she got cold. He gave her the papers for her contract, just as he had promised, placing them in her hands. "You are free," he said, "legally and completely. If you decide to leave, I will take you back to town in the morning. If you decide to stay, I will be glad of the help and the company. But it is your choice, Georgia, always your choice." She looked down at the papers, at her name written in official script. Free. She was free. "I would like to stay," she said quietly, "at least for a while, if that is all right." "That is more than all right." His smile returned, gentler this time. "Welcome to the Ellis Ranch." That night, Georgia lay in the soft bed in her locked room and stared at the ceiling. She could hear Xavier moving around downstairs, the creak of floorboards and the sound of him banking the fire. Normal domestic sounds. Safe sounds. She thought about the way he had smiled at her, about the kindness in his eyes. She thought about his story of his mother and father, about love born from an act of compassion. And she thought about the strange feeling in her chest when he looked at her, when their fingers had touched briefly as he handed her the key. It was too soon, she told herself. She barely knew him. He had just saved her from hell, and she was confusing gratitude with something else. But as she drifted off to sleep, warm and clean and safe for the first time in months, she could not help but wonder. The next morning, Georgia woke to sunlight streaming through her window and the smell of coffee drifting up from downstairs. For a moment, she was disoriented, unsure where she was. Then memory returned, and with it a flutter of anxiety. Had yesterday really happened? Was Xavier Ellis really as good as he seemed? She dressed quickly in his borrowed clothes and went downstairs. He was in the kitchen, frying eggs and bacon. He looked up when she entered, and that smile appeared again. "Good morning. Did you sleep well?" "Better than I have in a long time," she admitted. "Good. Sit. Breakfast is almost ready." They ate together, and then Xavier said, "I need to ride into town today for those supplies I never got yesterday. I will pick up some clothes for you while I am there. If you would rather come along, you can, but I thought you might want a quiet day to rest and recover." "I would like to stay here if that is all right." "Of course. The ranch hands will be back this morning. Sam and Tom, good men both. They know to expect you, and they will not bother you. If you need anything, just ask them." "What should I do while you are gone?" Xavier looked at her seriously. "Whatever you want, Georgia. You do not have to do anything. Rest, explore, sleep more. This is not Gunderson's place. You are not a prisoner or a servant." But Georgia had spent 8 months being worked to exhaustion, and idleness felt wrong. I would like to help, please. I need to feel useful. He studied her for a moment, then nodded. All right. The kitchen needs a good cleaning if you want to tackle that, but only if you want to. Do not push yourself too hard. After Xavier rode out, Georgia set to work on the kitchen. It was not dirty exactly, but it had the look of a place maintained by someone who did not quite know what they were doing. She scrubbed and organized, finding satisfaction in the simple domestic tasks. She was elbow-deep in soapy water when she heard horses outside. Through the window, she saw two men dismounting. They were young, probably in their mid-20s, dressed in dusty range clothes. One was tall and lanky with sandy hair, the other shorter and more compact with dark hair and a thick mustache. They came to the door, knocking politely. Georgia dried her hands and opened it. "You must be Georgia," the tall one said, pulling off his hat. "I am Sam Peterson. This here is Tom Walker. Boss told us you would be here." "Hello," Georgia said, suddenly shy. "We just wanted to introduce ourselves," Tom said. He had a kind face, weathered by sun and wind. "Let you know if you need anything while the boss is in town, we are around. We will be working on the south fence line most of the day." "Thank you," Georgia said. "I appreciate that." They tipped their hats and left, and Georgia watched them go with a sense of wonder. They had been respectful, polite, treating her like a person rather than property. Was this how normal people acted? Had she been in hell so long that basic kindness seemed extraordinary? She went back to her cleaning, losing herself in the work. By the time Xavier returned in the late afternoon, the kitchen was spotless, and she had made a pot of soup for dinner. Xavier came in carrying several parcels, which he set on the table. "I hope I got the sizes right," he said. "I had to guess." Georgia opened the parcels to find two dresses, one practical gray calico and one nicer blue cotton, along with undergarments, stockings, and a pair of boots. There was also a brush and comb, hairpins, and a small mirror. "This is too much," she protested. "It is what you need," Xavier said firmly. "Consider it part of your wages. Now tell me, how was your day?" They fell into a routine over the following weeks. Georgia took over most of the cooking and household chores, not because Xavier demanded it, but because she wanted to contribute. Xavier worked the ranch with Sam and Tom, rising before dawn and often not returning until after dark. They ate dinner together every evening, talking about their days, about the ranch, about inconsequential things. Georgia found herself watching Xavier more and more, noticing small things about him. The way he was always gentle with the animals, even when they were being difficult. The way he treated Sam and Tom like equals rather than subordinates. The way his eyes crinkled when he laughed at something she said. The way he always made sure she had enough to eat, even if it meant taking less for himself. She caught herself thinking about him when he was not around, wondering what he was doing, whether he was safe. It confused her, these feelings. She had known him less than a month, and yet he occupied her thoughts constantly. One evening in early September, they were sitting on the porch after dinner, watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Xavier had been quiet all day, and Georgia sensed something was on his mind. "What are you thinking about?" she asked finally. He was quiet for a long moment. "I am thinking about how much I have come to look forward to coming home at the end of the day. Because of the cooking," Georgia teased lightly. "Because of you." He turned to look at her, his expression serious. "These past few weeks, having you here, it has been good. Better than good. The house feels like a home again. I feel like myself again. And I know I said you were free to leave whenever you wanted, and that is still true, but I find myself hoping you never want to." George's heart was beating too fast. "I do not want to leave. No, no, I like it here. I like the ranch. I like Sam and Tom." She took a breath. "I like you, Georgia." He said her name like a prayer. I need to be honest with you about something. When I bought your contract, I truly meant what I said. I wanted to free you to give you a choice. But I would be lying if I said that was my only motivation. What do you mean? I mean that, when I looked at you in that saloon, I did not just see someone who needed help. I saw a woman who had been through hell and still had strength in her eyes. I saw someone brave and beautiful, someone I wanted to know. And over these past weeks, getting to know you, seeing your kindness and your humor and your resilience, I have fallen in love with you. Georgia could not breathe. You love me, I do. And I know it is too soon. I know you might not feel the same way. I know you might think your feelings are just gratitude. So I am not asking for anything. I just needed you to know, because I have never been good at hiding my feelings and I did not want you to misunderstand. She stood up, her legs shaky, and Xavier stood too, concern on his face. Georgia, are you all right? Instead of answering, she stepped forward and took his hand. His skin was warm, calloused from work, and his fingers closed gently around hers. I thought I was going to die in that wagon, she said quietly. I thought I had seen the last of anything good in this world, and then you looked at me and you were angry. Not at me, but for me. And then you smiled, and I thought maybe, just maybe, there was still some light left somewhere. Every day since then you have shown me kindness and respect and gentleness. You have given me back my humanity. And yes, I am grateful for that. But what I feel for you goes beyond gratitude. What do you feel? His voice was barely above a whisper. I feel like I am home for the first time in years. I feel safe. I feel seen. And when you are near me, I feel something in my chest that I never thought I would feel again. She looked up at him, at his kind eyes and his strong face. I think I am falling in love with you too, Xavier. He lifted his free hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and cupped her cheek. His palm was warm against her skin, his touch gentle. May I kiss you? Yes. He leaned down slowly, and their lips met in a kiss that was tender and sweet and full of promise. Georgia felt tears spring to her eyes, because this was nothing like she had feared all those weeks ago. This was not about possession or power. This was about two people finding each other in the darkness and choosing to step into the light together. When they pulled apart, Xavier rested his forehead against hers. I will spend every day of my life making sure you never regret this. I could never regret you. They stood there on the porch, holding each other as the stars began to appear overhead, and Georgia felt something she had not felt in more years than she could count. She felt happy. The weeks turned into months, and their love deepened. Xavier courted her properly, despite the fact that they lived in the same house. He brought her wildflowers from the fields, taught her to ride better so they could explore the ranch together, and told her stories about his parents and his childhood. Georgia opened up too, slowly at first, about her life in Missouri, about her parents' death, about the labor contractor who had promised her honest work and delivered her into Gunderson's hands. I wish I could go back and buy all of them, Xavier said one night as they sat by the fire. Mary and the others, I think about them sometimes, wonder where they ended up. You saved me, Georgia said, taking his hand. You cannot save everyone, but you saved me, and that matters. In November, Xavier asked her to marry him properly, with a ring he had commissioned from a jeweler in White Pine. It was simple but beautiful, a gold band with a small sapphire. I know we have not been together long, he said, down on one knee in the parlor, but I know my heart. I want to spend my life with you, Georgia Warren. Will you marry me? Yes, she said, tears streaming down her face. Yes, 1,000 times yes. They were married in December in a small ceremony at the church in White Pine, with Sam and Tom as witnesses and half the town in attendance. Georgia wore a new dress of green silk that Xavier had insisted on buying, and she carried a bouquet of dried flowers that she had pressed from the wildflowers Xavier had given her over the months. When the preacher pronounced them husband and wife and Xavier kissed her, Georgia felt a joy so profound it was almost painful. This was her life now. This kind, gentle man was her husband. This ranch was her home. She was free and she was loved and she was happy. Their wedding night was everything she had hoped and nothing like she had feared. Xavier was patient and gentle, always checking to make sure she was comfortable, always putting her needs before his own. And when they finally came together, it felt like the most natural thing in the world, like two pieces of a puzzle finding their fit. Afterward, they lay tangled together in Xavier's bed, their bed now, and Georgia traced patterns on his chest with her fingertips. "What are you thinking about?" Xavier asked, his voice drowsy. "I am thinking about that day in the saloon, how frightened I was, how certain I was that my life was over, and now look at where I am." "Where are you?" "I am in bed with my husband in our home, completely and perfectly happy." She propped herself up on one elbow to look at him. "You saved my life, Xavier Ellis. You saved mine too," he said seriously. "I did not realize how lonely I was until you were here. This ranch, it was just a place I worked. You turned it into a home. We did that together." "Yes," he agreed, pulling her down for another kiss. "Together." The winter passed peacefully. Georgia threw herself into making the house truly theirs, sewing new curtains, organizing and cleaning, creating a space that felt warm and welcoming. Xavier taught her the business side of ranching, showing her the books and explaining his plans for expanding the herd. "I want you to know everything," he said. "If something happens to me, I want you to be able to run this place on your own." "Nothing is going to happen to you," Georgia said firmly, but she learned anyway, asking questions and taking notes. In February, she started feeling unwell in the mornings. At first, she thought it was something she ate, but when it persisted for a week, she began to suspect the truth. The doctor in White Pine confirmed it. She was expecting a baby, due in the late summer. Xavier was over the moon when she told him, picking her up and spinning her around the kitchen before remembering himself and setting her down gently. "Are you happy?" Georgia asked, though she could see the answer in his face. "Happy does not begin to cover it," he said, his hand moving to rest on her still flat belly. "A baby, our baby. Are you hoping for a boy or a girl? I do not care, as long as both of you are healthy." The pregnancy was not easy. Georgia was sick for months, and Xavier hovered over her like a worried hen, much to her amusement. He insisted she rest, brought her ginger tea for the nausea, and read to her in the evenings when she was too tired to do anything but lie on the couch. "You are going to drive me mad with all this fussing," she told him one day in March, but she was smiling. "I cannot help it. You are carrying the most precious cargo in the world." As her belly grew, so did Xavier's protectiveness. He would not let her do any heavy work, insisting that Sam and Tom could handle anything she might think needed doing. Georgia chafed at the restrictions at first, but she had to admit it was nice to be cared for, to be cherished. In August, on a hot afternoon when the cicadas were singing in the trees, Georgia went into labor. Xavier sent Tom racing to town for the doctor while he and Sam did their best to make Georgia comfortable. The labor was long and hard, lasting through the night and into the next morning. Xavier never left her side, holding her hand, wiping her forehead, encouraging her. Finally, as the sun rose over the mountains, their son was born. He was small but healthy, with a strong cry and a full head of dark hair like his father's. "He is perfect," Xavier said, tears running down his face as he held his son for the first time. "Georgia, he is absolutely perfect." They named him Ethan after Xavier's father, and he became the center of their world. Georgia had never imagined herself as a mother, but she fell into the role as naturally as breathing. Xavier was a doting father, always wanting to hold Ethan, to rock him, to sing him lullabies in a surprisingly good voice. "I never knew I could love anyone as much as I love you," Xavier told Georgia one night as they watched their sleeping son. "But this little one, he has my whole heart." "You have enough heart for both of us," Georgia said, leaning her head on his shoulder. As Ethan grew from a baby into a toddler, the ranch prospered. Xavier's careful management and hard work paid off, and they were able to hire more hands and expand their operations. Georgia kept the books and managed the household, and between the two of them, they built something remarkable. Ethan was 2 when Georgia discovered she was pregnant again. This pregnancy was easier than the first, and in the spring of 1880 they welcomed a daughter they named Emma. She had Georgia's light brown hair and Xavier's blue eyes, and her brother was fascinated by her from the moment she was born. Their little family was complete, Georgia thought, watching Xavier play with their children on the floor of the parlor one evening. This was more than she had ever dared to dream of during those dark months under Gunderson's control. This was joy, pure and simple. But life on a ranch was never without challenges. In the summer of 1881, a drought struck the region. Water became scarce, and the cattle struggled. Xavier worked himself to exhaustion trying to keep the herd alive, digging new wells and hauling water. Georgia worried about him, about the lines of stress appearing on his face, but she did what she could to support him, managing everything else so he could focus on saving the ranch. One night, he came in well after midnight, covered in dust and sweat, his hands blistered from shoveling. Georgia was waiting up for him, as she always did, and she had hot food and water ready for a bath. "The ranch is not worth your health," she told him as she bandaged his hands. "If we lose cattle, we lose cattle, but I cannot lose you." "We are not going to lose the ranch," Xavier said firmly. "I will not let that happen, not after everything we have built here." "We will be fine no matter what happens," Georgia insisted. "As long as we have each other, we will be fine." Xavier pulled her into his arms, holding her tight. "How did I get so lucky to find you?" "I am the lucky one," Georgia whispered. "Every single day, I am the lucky one." The rains finally came in September, and the ranch was saved. They lost some cattle, but not as many as they had feared, and the herd slowly recovered. Xavier, exhausted but relieved, finally allowed himself to rest. "I am getting too old for this," he joked one evening. He was 31, hardly ancient, but the drought had aged him. "You are in your prime," Georgia assured him. She was 25 now, and she felt like she was finally living the life she was meant to live. The years continued to roll by, bringing their share of both challenges and joys. Ethan grew into a serious, thoughtful boy who loved the ranch and the cattle almost as much as his father did. Emma was bright and curious, always asking questions and getting into everything. Xavier taught them both to ride, to rope, to respect the land and the animals. Georgia watched her family with a heart so full she sometimes thought it might burst. Xavier had given her everything she never knew she needed. Not just freedom and safety, but love, real and deep and abiding. A partnership based on mutual respect and affection. Children who would grow up knowing they were cherished. A home. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Xavier took Georgia up into the hills overlooking the ranch. It was December again, and the air was crisp and cold, but the view was spectacular. They could see the house, the barns, the cattle grazing, the smoke rising from the chimney. Their whole world spread out below them. "I want to tell you something," Xavier said, taking her hands in his. "Every day for the past 10 years, I have thanked God for leading me into that saloon in White Pine. Because if I had not been there that day, if I had not seen you, my life would be so much emptier. You have given me everything, Georgia. A home, a family, a purpose beyond just running a ranch. You have given me love. You gave me those things first, Georgia said, tears freezing on her cheeks in the cold air. You saw me when I was at my lowest, when I was broken and afraid, and you saw something worth saving. You gave me back my life. And then, you gave me a life beyond anything I could have imagined. They stood there holding each other as the sun set, painting the sky in those same shades of orange and pink that Georgia had seen from Xavier's house on her first day. She thought about that girl, frightened and hurting, wearing borrowed clothes and unsure if she could trust the kindness she was being shown. She thought about the journey that had brought her from that moment to this one. "You remember when you smiled at me?" Georgia asked. That first day in the saloon, Xavier looked confused. "I do not think I smiled in the saloon." "Not in the saloon. Later in your kitchen, when I came down wearing your clothes after my bath. You looked at me and you smiled, and I thought maybe, just maybe, everything was going to be all right." "I smiled because I thought you looked beautiful," Xavier admitted. "Even exhausted and frightened and wearing clothes 3 sizes too big, you were the most beautiful thing I had ever seen." "That smile changed my life," Georgia said seriously. "It was the first moment I dared to hope. The first moment I thought maybe you were different from Gunderson, from the labor contractors, from all the men who had hurt me. That smile told me that maybe kindness was real, that maybe I could be safe." Xavier kissed her forehead, her cheeks, her lips. "I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know you are safe, that you are loved, that you are home." They rode back down to the house as darkness fell, and Georgia thought about the word home. It was not just a place, she had learned. It was the people you were with, the love you shared, the life you built together. Home was Xavier's arms around her at night. Home was her children's laughter echoing through the house. Home was this ranch, this land, this life they had created from the ashes of her old one. As the years continued to pass, Georgia's happiness only deepened. She watched Ethan grow into a young man who was the spitting image of his father, with the same strong work ethic and kind heart. Emma grew into a spirited young woman who could ride and rope as well as any ranch hand. Xavier went gray at the temples, but he was still strong and vital, still the first one up in the morning and the last one to bed at night. They celebrated birthdays and holidays, survived hard winters and dry summers, mourned the loss of Sam to a horse accident, and celebrated Tom's wedding to a widow from town. They added on to the house as their children grew, building new rooms and fixing old ones. They acquired more land, expanding the ranch until it was one of the most prosperous in the county. But more than any material success, they had each other. Georgia never took that for granted, never forgot those dark days when she thought she would die alone and in pain. Every morning when she woke up next to Xavier, every evening when they sat together on the porch watching the sunset, every moment of every day, she was grateful. Xavier felt the same way. He told her often, never letting a day go by without saying he loved her, without showing her in 100 small ways how much she meant to him. He brought her coffee in bed on cold mornings. He rubbed her feet when they ached after a long day. He listened when she needed to talk and gave her space when she needed to think. He was, in every way that mattered, her partner and her equal. When Ethan was 18, he told them he wanted to study veterinary medicine. It meant leaving the ranch for a few years, going to school back east, and Georgia could see the conflict on Xavier's face. He wanted his son to follow in his footsteps, to take over the ranch someday. But he also wanted Ethan to follow his own dreams. "Let him go," Georgia said quietly that night after Ethan had gone to bed. "Let him find his own path. If he is meant to come back to the ranch, he will, and if not, we will support whatever he chooses." "When did you become so wise?" Xavier asked, pulling her close. I learned from the best, she said, kissing him. They sent Ethan off with their blessing and their love, and he thrived in his studies. Emma, meanwhile, showed no interest in leaving. She loved the ranch as much as Xavier did, and she had a natural talent for working with horses. She is going to be running this place someday, Xavier said with pride one day, watching Emma break a particularly stubborn colt to saddle. She has got the gift. She has your gift, Georgia corrected, and your patience and your kindness with animals. As Georgia and Xavier entered their 50s, they began to slow down a bit. Not much, but enough to appreciate the quieter moments more. They took long rides together, just the two of them, exploring the corners of the ranch and talking about everything and nothing. They sat on the porch in the evenings, holding hands and watching the stars appear. You ever regret it? Georgia asked one night. Buying my contract, taking on a wife and a family when you could have stayed a bachelor. Xavier looked at her like she had grown a second head. Regret you? Georgia, you are the best thing that ever happened to me. I was half a person before you came into my life. You made me whole. I feel the same way about you, she said. You saved me in every way a person can be saved. We saved each other, Xavier said firmly. That is what love does. It saves us. Ethan returned from school a qualified veterinarian and set up practice in White Pine, but he spent most of his free time at the ranch, helping with the animals. He married a kind young woman named Sarah, and they gave Georgia and Xavier their first grandchild, a boy they named Xavier after his grandfather. Emma married one of the ranch hands, a good man named Daniel who loved her fiercely and treated her with the same respect and partnership that she had seen modeled in her parents. They stayed on the ranch, helping to run things as Xavier and Georgia gradually stepped back. In their 60s, Georgia and Xavier officially handed over the day-to-day operations of the ranch to Emma and Daniel, though they remained active and involved. They had earned their rest, but neither of them was quite ready to stop completely. I do not know what I would do with myself if I could not work the ranch at all, Xavier admitted. Then we will keep working it, just at a slower pace, Georgia said practically. They spent their days doing light work, playing with their grandchildren, and enjoying the life they had built together. On warm days, they would sit under the big oak tree near the house, and Georgia would read aloud while Xavier whittled or just listened with his eyes closed. One day, as they sat there, Georgia closed her book and looked at her husband. He was 70 now, his hair completely white, his face lined from decades of sun and wind. But to her, he was still the man who had smiled at her in his kitchen, the man who had offered her freedom and respect and love. What are you looking at? Xavier asked, opening his eyes. I am looking at my husband, my partner, the love of my life. Xavier reached over and took her hand, his grip still strong despite his age. I am looking at mine. We have had a good life, have we not? The best life, Xavier agreed. Better than I ever dreamed possible. They sat there in comfortable silence, watching their grandchildren play in the yard, listening to the sounds of the ranch. This place, this life, it was everything. It was the legacy they would leave behind, built on a foundation of love and respect, and the belief that everyone deserved to be treated with dignity. Years later, when Georgia was 75 and Xavier was 77, they sat on that same porch where Xavier had first confessed his love, watching yet another sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold. Xavier's health had been declining, and they both knew their time together was drawing to a close. I am not afraid, Xavier said, his voice weaker than it once had been but still steady, because I know I have lived a full life. I loved you and you loved me, and we created something beautiful together. We did, Georgia agreed, tears streaming down her face. We created a family, a home, a legacy. My only regret is that I will have to leave you. You will never leave me, Georgia said fiercely. You will always be with me in my heart, in our children, in this ranch. You are part of everything here. Xavier smiled, that same gentle smile that had captured her heart over 50 years ago. And you are part of everything I am. You always will be. He passed peacefully in his sleep that night, holding Georgia's hand, and she held him and wept for the man who had saved her, who had loved her, who had given her a life beyond her wildest dreams. But Georgia did not let grief consume her. She lived for another 5 years, watching her grandchildren grow, welcoming great-grandchildren, and ensuring that the ranch continued to thrive. She told stories about Xavier to anyone who would listen, making sure that his kindness and his goodness would never be forgotten. When she finally passed at the age of 80, peacefully in her sleep in the same bed she had shared with Xavier, the whole county mourned. The church in White Pine was packed for her funeral, filled with children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren, with ranch hands and townspeople, and everyone whose lives had been touched by her kindness and her strength. They buried her next to Xavier under the oak tree on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and Emma spoke at the service, telling the story of how her parents had met, of how Xavier had seen a woman who needed help and had chosen to act, of how Georgia had been brave enough to trust again, to love again, to build a new life from the ashes of the old one. They showed us what love looks like, Emma said, her voice breaking. Not the easy, simple kind, but the kind that saves lives and builds legacies, the kind that endures. They taught us that everyone deserves to be treated with dignity and respect, that kindness is never wasted, and that love is the most powerful force in the world. The Ellis Ranch continued for generations, passed down through Emma's line, and the story of Xavier and Georgia became family legend. Every child who grew up on that ranch learned about the rancher who had bought a woman's freedom and ended up buying her heart, and about the woman who had thought she was being sold into more pain until he smiled. And on quiet evenings, when the sun set over the mountains in shades of purple and gold, some swore they could see two figures sitting on that porch, hand in hand, watching over the land they loved and the family they had built together. A testament to the power of love, kindness, and second chances. A reminder that even in the darkest moments, hope can bloom, and that sometimes one act of compassion can change not just one life, but generations to come. The end.